is Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of McMaster's Office of Alumni Engagement and McMaster Continuing Education, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for our Caregiving Essential webinar, Aging and Dementia Information Now, McMaster's Treasure Trove of Resources. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we reside here at McMaster University acknowledges and recognizes that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So here we go. I'd like to introduce our guests today, or it's not our guests, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. As always, Donna Thomson is joining us from Ottawa. Donna is a caregiver, author, and educator. She is the author of 2 best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. Donna also facilitates our free online course for caregivers, Caregiving Essentials. She is a co-designer of the Creating Caregiver Friendly Workplace course and co-designer and co-director of the Family Engagement and Research Program here at McMaster. And today we have a real treat. Dr. Anthony Levinson is joining us. Many of you already know Anthony as the host of our ever popular health and wellness webinar series with the Optimal Aging Portal. Today he's going to be our guest. We're putting him in the hot seat. He is a professor and director of the Division of E-Learning Innovation, as well as the John Evans Chair in Health Sciences Education Research here at McMaster. He practices consultation liaison psychiatry with a special focus on dementia and neuropsychiatry. His area of research is technology-enhanced knowledge translation with a specific focus on web-based learning. Key initiatives related to aging and age-related conditions include the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal, the iGeriCare, a dementia education platform for family caregivers, Dementia Foundation, a training program for unregulated care providers, and of course, the Canadian Geriatric Psychiatric Online Program. He is currently working on several research studies looking at the impact of dementia education. And from all of that, he is well-versed to talk to us today on dementia and the resources we have here at McMaster. Thank you, Donna and Anthony, for joining us. I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. I am so excited today to be talking with Dr. Anthony Levinson because I know from personal experience that the Optimal Aging Portal is just one of a myriad of fantastic resources at McMaster for both family caregivers and I know that paid healthcare providers use these resources very often too. So we're going to do a deep dive into all kinds of information that you can find about all kinds of need to know topics when you're looking after someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's disease. But first, I want to ask you, Anthony, I want us to tell you a little bit about yourself so that we can get to know you a little tiny bit before we do that deep dive into all the resources. So I just want to say that just a couple minutes ago we were chatting and you said that you actually studied English and philosophy before you got into all of this work in psychiatry, geriatric psychiatry. And how did you get from there to there?
Well, first, thank you, Donna, for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to do this crossover webinar on your platform, and thanks, McMaster, for hosting. So, yeah, my background, I did start off in English Lit and philosophy, and I guess had a appreciation for narrative and thinking and the brain. And after my first master's degree related to critical theory, I was eager to have a more applied and I guess go into a discipline that might have a more direct impact on helping people and people's lives. And so transitioned into medicine, but maintained my appreciation for narrative and literature and philosophy. And I suppose the discipline that I went into in terms of psychiatry is a lot about trying to help people, but also understand their stories. And I think in terms of the caregiver experience, trying to have that understanding and appreciation for what people are going through, which is very individual. But I think I've also had so professionally, the type of psychiatry that I practice, I work in a hospital setting and I work with many patients and family, friend, care partners in that setting when a loved one is in the hospital for any reason. Could be a pneumonia or it might be a complication related to a cognitive issue like dementia or delirium, but they're in the hospital for some health issue. So it's a time of stress for the people experiencing it as well as the care partner. I've also had some personal experiences being a family care partner to people living with dementia, so have a little bit of a sense of what that experience is like as well.
Hmm. My mom had dementia, lived with dementia for about 10 years before she died at the age of 96 in 2018. So we share that, and we both share a love of storytelling and recognize the value of storytelling in influencing how systems work,
Hmm.
particularly in healthcare. So I really now I want to pass it to you, Anthony, to tell us about all of these resources that exist and how caregivers can find them and what we can learn from them.
Well, I will do a hopefully not too long walkthrough of a couple of the key resources. Christine and yourself mentioned the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal. Really, for those who are less familiar, I wanted to just provide a bit of an overview of what one can expect to find on the portal, and I will just briefly highlight a couple of the other resources that I think may be helpful for care partners as well. So, I guess one thing that's fair to say is this is a particular focus on health information resources that people can find online. There are, for many people, this would be sort of a knowledge is power type of approach. Like the more I can understand or the more high quality information I can find, the more this might help one in that kind of caregiver journey. But of course, there are a lot of other resources and services that we won't be talking about necessarily that are another important aspect of how a family or friend care partner might, need to access, whether that's part of the healthcare system or community services or resources. We won't necessarily be talking about that as much, though we have lots of time to talk afterwards. So, the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal is a free resource, and if you go to the homepage, you can see there's all manner of different topics related to the health and social aspects of aging. What we've tried to do is bring together high quality, evidence-based health and social information because there is so much information out there, but it's not always accurate, and there may be sources of information that are less good than others. So, our goal with the Optimal Aging Portal was really to provide this website as a free service for the public, but also for healthcare providers, public health professionals, policymakers. There is content for all of those different groups about optimal aging. And the goal was to really provide reliable, best evidence information so that people could sort of trust a little bit more in the content. Um, it's not like there's a shortage of information. In fact, one could argue the problem right now is sifting through the volume of information. If you do a search on almost any health condition, you will get thousands of returns from a Google search, for example. So, how do you know that the information is reliable and based on evidence, or is it somebody trying to sell you something? Is it based on, the latest, greatest single research study? Whereas the content on the portal, we try to base it on better known science, not just one single study in a mouse model, but rather, multiple studies, what we call systematic reviews of topics where there's been, a history of replicating the information so that it's more scientifically credible. Often what we see in the news is that latest, greatest thing. And those might be very interesting scientific discoveries, but it might take a long time before you go from the discovery of a new gene to a treatment that's actually going to benefit somebody. We're pretty fortunate at McMaster that we have a number of different expert researchers who have a strong focus on identifying the best quality information. So the portal brings together expertise from my colleagues in evidence-based content for healthcare professionals or clinician, for public health professionals, for policymakers and social scientists. And one of the things that our team does is we focus on how to present the information to people to maximize their learning. So there's a lot of different formats of content on the portal. Yes, it's a website, but we present content in different ways. We have blog posts or short articles that summarize sort of recent but high quality scientific articles, evidence summaries, which do the same, often looking at either randomized controlled trials, so a particular kind of study, or these reviews that happen. Email alerts are weekly digests of new content that has been added to the portal. So we're always adding new blog posts and other articles to the portal. And the free email alert you can get in your inbox, and it will provide a nice summary of new content that's been added. And then we also have some multimedia content, videos, e-learning lessons that may be a deeper dive. We do webinars, as Christine mentioned, and those are recorded and also available as videos on the portal. So this is just an example of the myriad blog posts that one might see on various topics: falls prevention, financial and social content, caring for the psychological health of caregivers, vitamin D. So again, a very wide range of topic that covers the gamut, really. Here's an example of an email alert. So this was a summary showing new e-learning that had been posted, a live upcoming event, a blog post. So again, these are great ways to kind of stay up to date on new content that's added weekly. Videos on a wide range of topics get added periodically as well. Longer form ones like the recordings of webinars, also some short explainers from McMaster faculty. We have micro-learning examples too. These are actually for our e-learning series, you can often subscribe for free to a series of 5 to 10 emails about that topic as well. So a lot of people enjoy going through the e-learning lesson and then also receiving a weekly content-based email, which we call micro-learning. We also have a YouTube channel where the recordings and other videos are posted. So if you're somebody who likes to digest video content and you're on YouTube a lot, there's some excellent recordings, again, on a pretty wide range of topics: cognitive behavioral therapy, bone health, depression, insomnia, all kinds of great speakers from our webinar series. our upcoming one, if you're interested. Just a plug for our next webinar is coming soon, December 4th. We do them in the evenings, so from 7 to 8 p.m. And this one's with Dr. Marla Beauchamp, who's a physiotherapist and an expert in falls prevention, and also the director of the MIRA Dixon Hall Institute. So should be a great webinar that evening. A couple of other types of content on the portal. We have a series that we created and actually studied on dementia risk reduction. So you can access e-learning lesson on dementia risk at dementiarisk.ca. It's actually on the portal. There's also articles related to individual risk factors that you can read more about. We have another e-learning lesson on anxiety and anxiety disorders, another one on delirium, which is a common and quite frightening condition that may occur often to older adults in hospital. So that's just a very quick sweep of the McMaster Optimal Aging portal. And again, you can access that. If you're interested in some of the health professions content, then you can also register to access other articles as well. But most of the content for the public, you don't have to create an account or anything like that. You can just go there and start exploring. Our iGeriCare series is again another free website, iGeriCare.ca. This is very specifically designed for education about being a care partner, a family friend, caregiver for somebody living with dementia. Now, it has also been used by others, including people with cognitive impairment themselves. So we know that there's the site appeals to many, but given that this is a caregiver essentials webinar, I want to highlight that the site was really designed for family and friend care partners of people living with dementia. And again, wide range of topics. This was my colleague, Dr. Richard Stramko, who's a geriatrician, and we got together and it was like, if we could sit down with a caregiver and explain sort of soup to nuts, provide an overview of dementia, everything they, might benefit from knowing about the different types and the different treatments and caring for somebody at home and some of the other symptoms that may happen. So that's what we tried to capture in the iGeriCare site. There are also resources, and we do the occasional live Q&A event as well as part of iGeriCare. There's also the ability to have that email-based learning as well. So this would, when somebody's coming in to the clinic or we're seeing a patient who's, developed symptoms of dementia, even though we spend a lot of time compared to other physicians with families and patients, there's never enough time to kind of go over all of the things that we might want to share. So the iGeriCare site was really designed to provide more in-depth overview of different topics for caregivers specifically. You can see there's also content on caregiver wellness as well. We do have for healthcare providers, we do have a sort of a certificate-based course called Dementia Foundations. This one does have a fee associated with it, but is more designed for personal support workers, healthcare aides, paid care companions, so kind of a different thing. And similarly for people who might be working in long-term care homes, this is a free course that we offer as well. So we do create online resources for healthcare providers as well, but the portal and iGeriCare are really geared to family and friend caregivers. So those are some of the main resources that I just wanted to give a quick overview of, but I'm happy to talk about them, other resources, anything and everything.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Anthony. I mean, I think people will definitely get a flavor for what's there. We have had one question in the Q&A, and it was the same question actually I had in my mind too. Um, Lots of times, I mean, we know how busy family caregivers are, and often under real time pressures because there just is. There's a very famous book called, I'm sure you're familiar with it, The 36-Hour Day.
Yeah.
And so there are not enough hours in the day for many, many family caregivers. So, how do you search within these sites to find what you need fairly efficiently and quickly?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. On the McMaster Optimal Aging portal, there is a browse function, so you can go and browse to say, let's say there's a particular condition like dementia, or you're caring for somebody who has asthma or COPD. You can browse to find a particular condition, and then you'll be able to see all of the content on the portal related to that. And similarly, on many of the pages of the portal, so if you go to look at the blog posts, you can see the list of topics that you can filter the list by. Or for example, on iGeriCare, one of the things that makes that site a little bit easier to find what you're looking for is it's a one-trick pony just focused on dementia for caregivers. So I think that different approaches in that sense for the different sites, because the McMaster Optimal Aging portal covers every topic under the sun using search or browse, or if you know the type of content that you like, blog posts or e-learning, then you can go there and filter by the topic of interest.
Mhm.
For other sites like iGeriCare, it's the site itself is sort of almost pre-filtering. This is a site for people who are family caregivers of people living with dementia. So it's pretty easy to find the content because it doesn't have hundreds and hundreds of articles and things like that.
Many family caregivers of individuals with Alzheimer's or dementia are aging themselves. In my case, my sister and I were in our 60s when my mom had dementia and died. So, you know, those of us in this generation may not be that tech savvy. So, is it possible to ask a question in the search bar? For example, is it possible, is the algorithm such that you would get some relevant results if you posted a question like, is it normal in dementia to have shortness of breath or
Hmm.
something like that?
Yeah. So that's a couple of really good points there. One, I will say the tech savviness of older adults is probably underestimated. So many it's the fastest growing demographic of people adopting technology. So I do think, obviously those of us joining today on the webinar, hadn't had a found it on the net, subscribed to the webinar, have Zoom installed on a device. And the reality is that while not everybody has that comfort for different reasons, um, we probably tend to underestimate the technical abilities of many older adults. And as I say, the data from surveys suggests that most older adults are very comfortable with the technologies that they would need to be able to get access to good quality resources. And that's certainly borne out by participants on the McMaster Optimal Aging portal when we ask folks on surveys. There are many people in their 80s and 90s even using the portal quite comfortably. And we do try to design things like that. So to your second point, we are looking to add additional features that might facilitate the type of posing a question interface on the portal. So you can type that into the search interface, but it really is right now designed to be a bit more of a traditional one for browsing topics or typing in a search term that is phrased as a search term rather than a question. We
Right.
are actually looking at adding features that would allow it to be exactly what you described. And obviously you can do that in Google or other search engines, but we're trying to emulate that a little bit more, but only drawing on the better quality evidence from within the portal to answer that question. So I'll just say coming soon.
That's great because I think that is, I think with the coming of AI and, it's going to be easier, I think, to find the information that we're looking for because so many times when we're looking after someone, every caregiving situation and every patient with dementia or Alzheimer's is completely unique.
Yes.
And there may be other health conditions, comorbidities at the same time. And so to find an answer to a very specific question, sometimes you just need to ask that question. And I think I'm happy actually that that's coming. Because again,
I think yeah, it's a great point. I think it does also highlight though the importance of hopefully having a good relationship with your healthcare team as well, because I think there is an empowerment to it, and I agree with you that some of the artificial intelligence features should enable us to be able to create platforms that can accurately respond to it, but there are still some important caveats and risks associated with different types of AI in terms of the content of responses. It's why before we implement something like that on the McMaster Optimal Aging portal, we want to guarantee that the wizard or AI Q&A box is not going to hallucinate or confabulate, make up something that sounds lovely because of the syntax, but actually is not evidence-based. So even if we were to implement something like this, that's the importance of being able to have a conversation with your doctor or nurse practitioner where it's like, I understand the background of this person's healthcare conditions, so I can factor that into a response that really is tailored and hopefully reliable. So
yes. Well, you mentioned, conversations with healthcare providers, with general practitioners or geriatricians, if you're lucky enough to have a
mm,
geriatrician. Um, and so I'm very interested in imagining scenarios. So to help listeners today understand how they could um, use information they locate in the optimal aging portal or in iGeriCare, and then you bring it to their healthcare provider and say, you know, like hypothetically, um, do you think this is my mom? What do you think about
yeah.
this and the patient that you know? So, can you flesh that out a little bit? Because I bet you have lots of conversations with family caregivers who are using these products and maybe you've evaluated how this works. So, can you tell us about that particular use of this information? How can families interface the information they're finding through these resources online, and then a conversation with their healthcare provider.
So I'll preface it by saying I think a lot of it might depend on the individual healthcare provider, unfortunately. So I think it can be of great value. And it is about opening a dialogue. So even better, I think, if it's evidence-based content from iGeriCare or the portal. But I am quite happy for patients, families to come to me with any type of, question or something they've found from a search of the internet, even if it doesn't seem to be evidence-based, it still shows somebody who's interested in, taking charge of their health and understanding more. So in some ways, no question, or if somebody's coming with a resource, it's an opportunity for the healthcare provider to, you know, have a better understanding of where that family member's coming from or where the patient's coming from, and either reinforce and validate the information that they've found, or like give them a corrective lens and talk about other resources that might be more evidence-based. So I think unfortunately there are some practitioners who might either get defensive or be dismissive. We don't have time for that, or yeah, whatever. So I'm sure there's all manner of people that have stories about something important that they brought to their healthcare team, and they really didn't necessarily feel listened to. So I think there is some difference in attitude. I feel like younger healthcare providers probably are a little bit more in attuned to having patients come with information and having more of a conversation and helping with shared decision making. But I think there are individual physicians or members of the healthcare team that might be less open to that. Either they feel dismissive or defensive, but I do feel that among the younger generation of healthcare providers, there is a bit more of a sense that people coming with information to help with shared decision making is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I could go on
Yeah,
about
yeah. I think everybody's got a story of an
oh, I
interaction
hate
that
that.
did not go
Yeah.
well. So
No, I
yeah,
know. Oh, don't come to me with your Google search or
yeah,
something when you're
yeah.
doing, 24-hour care at home and you are an expert in your loved one.
Yeah, and so
Uh,
I like to think that there could be a better experience for people when they come to say, "Oh, I'm really glad that you've brought this. This is an important topic. I'm not familiar with that resource, but here's a resource that also talks about that, and maybe even use it as a sort of shared teaching moment to say, have a look at this resource on that same topic, and then maybe at our next appointment we can talk about that in more detail, or here's the short version of the thing that you've brought in, but here's a good place to learn more." Again, I think sometimes with the busyness of the healthcare system, or individual like provider personality, that may not be the optimistic version that I've portrayed. So
yeah, I know. We had in our family, we had a doctor who actually said to me, I said, with my mom and our son, who is very medically complex, I said, many doctors wouldn't take us. Many have said, no, I couldn't possibly take you, go somewhere
yeah,
else. And our doctor said to me, I said to him, why do you take families like mine? Because when you don't have to. And he said, well, I guess I'm just okay with uncertainty.
yes,
And
I I
that
think
was
that's a
that
yeah.
was the most beautiful thing anybody ever said. And I think when you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, you're living with a massive amount of uncertainty. And you need people to be in that space with you and to be able to use evidence-based knowledge to build consensus around what do
Yeah.
you think we should do?
Yeah.
What's the best, should we get a feeding tube for mom? Or all of these
Yeah.
things are, um, you need to make informed decisions all day, every day, and you need a kind of team approach. So I am very glad, that this information exists for people because knowledge is power. And I'm interested and I do want to save time for questions because I know there are
Mm.
lots of questions about dementia itself, and lots of people have questions about that, and we will get to that. But I just wanted to quickly ask you, um, first of all, is there information if families want to participate in research? So if they're not having any luck with treatments and they think, oh, maybe there's a research project we could join, a clinical trial or something like that. Can you find out about that through the Optimal Aging portal or iGeriCare?
So right now, that is not content that is listed on either of those sites. Through the Alzheimer Society of Canada website, they do have a page that talks about clinical trials or research that's happening and ways that people can get involved. And within our Hamilton McMaster community, we will, over the next probably 6 months, be setting up a similar type of website resource to talk about the different studies because there's quite a lot of research that is expanding specifically in the area of dementia. Through the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging, or MIRA, they have a platform called Voice, I think it is, or and that actually, I'll summarize some of these specific resources where people can learn more about opportunities to participate. But that's another platform that actually often includes messages related to research that people can get involved with. And the MIRA group has quite a lot of research projects that are ongoing. So there are a few ways to find out about research in these areas, particularly dementia, not necessarily right now through the portal or iGeriCare,
Okay.
but through some of these other resources.
Right. And just to remind listeners, MIRA is the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging. Um, and now, I mean, I'm wondering if we can get into some information about dementia and Alzheimer's itself. So, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
So that's a great question and an important clarification. Dementia is sometimes referred to as an umbrella term because there are literally hundreds of different diseases that may cause dementia. Alzheimer disease is the most common cause of dementia, so that's why they're almost synonymous. Probably over half of people who develop dementia likely have Alzheimer disease as the cause. So estimates are somewhere around 50 to 60% of dementia is caused by Alzheimer disease. But there are several other relatively common forms. So we talk about vascular dementia. This might be somebody who's had small strokes or a larger stroke that has affected parts of their brain and led over time to dementia. And Parkinson's disease, while people associate that with the slowing down of movement, over time, about 75–80% of people with Parkinson's disease will also develop a dementia later on in the course of the illness. Lewy body dementia is another form of dementia. The comic Robin Williams developed Lewy body dementia. Frontotemporal dementia is another form. So as I said, there are many other more rare causes, and some people might have a mix, so might have some element of Alzheimer's disease mixed with vascular dementia. So those are some of the more common types. And when we talk about dementia, we talk about somebody who has developed cognitive impairments, things like memory problems or language or changes in their processing speed. It's viewable on objective testing. So if you do cognitive screening in a doctor's office, it will be measurable on an assessment of their memory or attention or language. And then it's severe enough that it is interfering with independent function. So all of the different things, whatever the disease is, if they've progressed to the point of being called a dementia, it's because there are cognitive impairments that can be seen on testing and they're interfering with independent function. And, unfortunately, at this time, there are no cures for the most common causes of dementia, like these degenerative conditions that affect the brain, like Alzheimer's disease. But there are some treatments that may help with some of the symptoms, and there are it's an ongoing area of active research because of the increasing prevalence of dementia.
Yeah. Um, we had a question in the Q&A about, could you tell us a little bit about what are some of the early signs? And in order to get a diagnosis, which is often a pathway to getting some help at home, do you have to see a doctor, or can you as basically self-diagnose in your family and self-declare to the home care agencies or whatever that your mother or someone or your husband, wife has dementia? So how does that work? What does it look like at the beginning, and how do you get the diagnosis?
So there are a lot of different signs and symptoms of dementia. So it's going to depend on the type of dementia, uh, because different parts of the brain may be affected. And to be honest, regardless of what the cause is, Alzheimer, vascular, it does depend on which parts of the brain have been affected. So think of if the front parts of the brain have been affected, that often controls people's judgment or impulsivity. So the earliest symptoms might be a change in how somebody copes with stress. They might lose their temper in a manner that is a change from normal, or they may become more impulsive or say something inappropriate, whereas before they might have been proper, because that's what the front part controls. There's other areas of the brain that are frequently involved in language. So another person might have trouble with word finding. Maybe it's like they just can't get the word, it's on the tip of their tongue, or they might mix up names or mix up words from that standpoint. Memory is often affected. In most of the dementias, memory is prominently affected. But again, some of the ones that affect more the frontal lobes might cause more behavioral changes. The symptoms like apathy are very common, and this is like a lack of motivation that affects many people, especially people who might have had vascular dementia with sort of smaller strokes. So that's one that can often look like the person's depressed because they don't seem interested or motivated to participate. So that might be one of the earlier symptoms. We talk about a sort of complex cognitive function called executive function. And this is when you have to do, problem solving or sequence a bunch of things. Like maybe you previously would host and cook a complex Thanksgiving meal, but now just coordinating all of the different dishes and the timing and, trying to problem solve this type of thing becomes more and more challenging. So, visual spatial ability. You may notice somebody starting to lose their way, even in, say, more familiar environments. Maybe they get lost when they're in their own neighborhood or their own city, and that's very uncharacteristic. So again, lots of different cognitive domains. The brain is very, very complicated. So the earliest symptoms often relate to memory and language, but may also involve some of these other domains like problem solving or changes in emotions or behavior or impulsivity as well.
Mhm.
To the second question around getting the diagnosis, while family or friends or the person themselves may notice changes, you really can't self-diagnose. And there's a couple of important reasons for that. One is there may be a large number of things that cause medical conditions that cause cognitive changes that look like dementia, but they're actually treatable. So you might have a thyroid disorder, and that's causing a slowing down of your thinking and your cognition that might look like dementia, but is actually reversible. You might have an anemia that is making you feel weak or tired, or you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain, so it's harder to remember things, but that could be treatable. You might have a vitamin B12 deficiency. You might be on medications like painkillers, things with opioids or sleeping pills that can also affect your thinking and memory. So it's really important to see a doctor, not just to get that diagnosis of dementia, but to rule out these other medical issues that may well be contributing to cognitive changes, brain changes, memory problems, but are not actually a dementia. They could be treated. So that's a really important part of the assessment of dementia, is to make sure there's nothing that could be reversed.
It's so interesting. And it's a very complicated when there are multiple, potentially conditions going on. And you did mention about delirium too. And my stepfather had a surgery with Parkinson's and came out of the anesthetic, very delirious. And so you see these multiple things going on. That finally settled down and he came back to himself.
Yeah.
Um, of course, but I had no idea, at that point that I had never heard of this
Yeah.
anesthesia delirium before, and how it's a real thing with older people, and it's very, very scary for all concerned.
And
Um,
it can often take a longer time to resolve. So as, in the normal way, when we think about delirium versus dementia, we think, oh, something that comes on fairly quickly and maybe gets better fairly quickly. But for many older adults, especially if they have a condition like Parkinson's, it can take longer period for the delirium to reverse. So in the meantime, sometimes doctors will get impatient and they will say, "Oh, I guess they must have a dementia." But actually, if they make sure they identify the underlying cause and they treat it, and the person can return to their pre-surgery kind of baseline.
yeah, yeah. It did take him about a week, though. I mean, he was
Yeah.
wide awake.
Yeah.
The anesthetic was gone, but he had
Yeah.
delirium for like a week. Um, so I'm interested. We've had a very interesting question, which I know you're going to love. Um, what about, can you use these knowledge resources to investigate something you've seen in the way of herbal products or puzzles and mind game exercises? And can is it, are any of these things that we see all the time in advertised or in the news, lots of apps and websites where you can theoretically stave off dementia
Mhm.
by doing puzzles and things like that? first of all, what is your opinion of all of these things? And if there's a particular herb, for example, can you search that? And maybe it's a good thing, like you talked about a B vitamin. So,
Yeah, so let's talk about um, herbal remedies or
mm,
complementary alternative therapies because that's an easier one to answer quickly. At this time, there is really no compelling evidence to support any particular herb or complementary alternative therapy or superfood that is where there's evidence to say, oh, this is going to help prevent dementia, or if there's already a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment or dementia, this is going to help to treat it. So if you had a vitamin deficiency, that's a different story. Like if you are diagnosed with a B12 deficiency, then treatment with B12 will probably be helpful for your nerves and your brain. But if you don't have a deficiency, there's no evidence around particular vitamins or herbs or ginkgo biloba, coconut water, like all of these things have been studied, or most of them have been studied fairly rigorously, and nothing has emerged as a miracle cure. So no good evidence to support the herbal side of the equation. When it comes to cognitive activity, that has been shown to have a beneficial effect in reducing risk of dementia. So if you don't have a dementia, staying cognitively active is one of 14 evidence-based like risk or protective factors that has been shown to be helpful. And on that dementiarisk.ca resource, which is on the portal, there
mm,
is all kinds of evidence-based information about what we do know in terms of how to reduce your risk, which can be pretty substantial, probably getting closer to like 50%
wow.
of dementias could be reduced, prevented, delayed through a large number of things. And those include cognitive activity and social activity. So, broadly speaking, being physically active and looking after your weight, eating a healthy diet that is well-rounded, looking after your blood vessel health. I spoke about the vascular dementia risk and mixed. So, looking after high blood pressure, so managing and controlling high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and diabetes, those all help your blood vessel health and can reduce your risk. Managing the special senses, managing hearing loss, preventing damage, or if you have hearing loss, get your hearing checked. Visual loss, so if you have something like cataracts, those things probably contribute to cognitive and social activity as well. If you have depression, get it assessed and treated. So there's smoking and drinking, not just bad for your, cardiovascular health or the health of your liver or risk of cancer, but actually smoking and excess alcohol have also been shown to be risk factors for dementia. So there's actually a lot of things you can do. Doing, several of those healthy lifestyle things is, the more the merrier, and what's good for the brain is good for the body and vice versa. And you're going to likely reduce risk of other conditions as well. When it comes to which specific cognitive activities, there's a little bit less data on that.
Mm,
But staying cognitively active, pushing yourself a little bit, almost think of it a bit like how you might need to work a muscle with exercises. So you want that desirable difficulty. So if you find the easy crossword puzzle or the easy word search or the easy Sudoku too easy, that's probably, try and push yourself by doing the harder version or learning a new language or participating in webinars or those things that stretch your mind a little bit have been shown to be helpful in terms of the types of cognitive activities. It doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive brain game or app that you're spending money on. It seems like it could be a wider range of things that have some degree of desirable difficulty that keep you cognitively active.
Hmm. Oh, I have so many more questions, and we're running out of time, but I will ask you this, Anthony. Um, Can you talk a little bit about genetics and dementia and Alzheimer's? I mean, I know even personally, a lot of my friends are worried because their mother died of
Yeah.
Alzheimer's or their grandmother had dementia. What do we know about the genetics of Alzheimer's and dementia, and how likely is it that if you had multiple family members who had it, you're going to get it too?
So that's a great question. And in the handout of resources that we will share in our follow-up email for viewers, I'll also include a link to a webinar that my colleague Dr. Trisha Wu and I did not that long ago on genetics and dementia. So um, it's we often distinguish between, are there genes that really strongly determine that you're going to get dementia versus are there some genes that might, increase your risk, but they're not necessarily going to cause it. And so there's only a very small number of dementias that are strongly determined by genetic factors. I'm sure there's more, that will come with research, but most people who develop dementia, they don't have one of these very strongly deterministic genes. So probably only about 1 to 2% of dementias have this very strong genetic component. Usually starts at a younger age and will run in more family members. There are a few of these genes that lead to a young onset Alzheimer disease, some other diseases like Huntington disease, for example. Again, very strongly determined by genes, but probably only about 1 to 2% of cases of dementia have that. Some of the other genes that confer some increased risk. One of the ones that people may have heard about is this ApoE4 gene. And so, depending on your genotype, how many copies of that ApoE4, you may be at more or less risk of developing the sort of sporadic form of late life Alzheimer disease. And the things that we talked about just now around how to reduce your risk of dementia, those seem to apply irrespective of whether you have some of those risk related genes like ApoE4. So, of the things that you can't change, what we call the non modifiable risks for dementia, older age is probably the single most important risk factor. So your risk goes up, kind of doubles every 5 years over the age of 65 to a point. Like not everybody is going to get dementia, no matter how old they age, but that risk does go up quite a bit from age 65 to 95. And then the second factor are some of these other genes that do increase your risk a bit, but they're not deterministic or predictive. And those other things that we talked about will also reduce your risk, even if you have some of those risk predisposing genes. But I will include the link to that webinar that has a deeper dive, just talking about the genetics of dementia as well as risk reduction behaviors.
Oh, thank you. And I know we've had a question about denial and stubborn behavior,
Mm.
all the rest. So if there's any resources that you could include about that too, I'd be very interested. Just in retrospect, my mother was
Sure.
very much
I,
one of those individuals.
just to allay some people's concerns too about having like multiple family members, my own case as well, because age is like one of the more important risk factors. If you and because with our aging population, the prevalence of dementia is going up. It's not that unusual that you may have 2 or 3 family members living into their 80s or even their 90s. And so their risk of developing sort of the spontaneous form of dementia, typically Alzheimer's, is quite high. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're at increased genetic risk. It just speaks a little bit to the risks associated with older age and that. So it's not uncommon that people may have family members, especially if they're long lived in their 80s or 90s, where there's, maybe cases of dementia in the family.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Anthony. What an education. And it's just been so much fun speaking with you. So I really want to thank you. And we must have you back because we have many more questions in the Q&A and in the chat. So I know that there's a massive need for this kind of information. And I hope that everyone listening today will go straight to iGeriCare and the Optimal Aging Portal. So thank you so much, and over to you, Christine.
Oh, my camera's not, there we go. It's slow. I'm in the student center, so I think the Wi-Fi is really slow with all the students here. So thank you, Anthony and Donna. Anthony, always, I learned so much. And what I learned today is I'm going to have to take calculus, right? to stave off, because I will find exceedingly challenging. So that will put me, ahead.
You have to pick something you're going to stick with. If it's too hard, you'll drop out.
Oh yeah, well, I'll come look for you. I bet you'd be good at calculus. Anyway, so thank you to you both. So maybe I'll ask Jenna, she can put up the slide for our talk next month. We're talking about advanced care planning. And there we go. So if you whip out your phone, you can register that way. And in the follow-up email, as Anthony mentioned, we'll put in all the resources. And also our next Optimal Aging Portal talk is on falls prevention, as Anthony mentioned, and I can put a link to that webinar as well if you're interested in that, because in Canada, at least in Southern Ontario, we are entering winter, and falls are certainly a big issue for our elderly population. So we want to keep them upright, not down. So thank you to you both, and I think we'll leave it for there because we're a little after 1. Thank you all for joining us wherever you are, and we look forward to having you join us again. So take care, and we'll talk soon. Bye now.